Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder and Adam Jacoby here this Monday, right? Yeah, Monday evening. I have to do that every time we podcast, you guys. I need to start looking at a calendar before we hop on. Portal, basketball, Christmas, holidays, all that got us all sorts of topsy-turvy right now. So we're figuring it out as playing it by ear, figuring it out as we go along. But before we get started, make sure that you subscribe wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave that rating review. If you're on YouTube, drop a like, drop a comment, let us know what you're thinking about the Hawkeyes, the portal, and all things going on with Iowa basketball, football right now. We're happy to hear from you. First things first, though, for this podcast this evening, Iowa has their second signee out of the transfer portal. It's now multiple, not just one. You got two. Count them. One, two signees via the transfer portal in Hank Brown and now Jonah Pace from Central Michigan. Premium subscribers knew this one was coming for over a week now. We got our articles up and ready to go as soon as possible when Jonah committed. I've also got a conversation with him that I'll be writing an article about here tonight for tomorrow. So tons of that premium content there for you at iowa.rivals.com. If you're not a subscriber yet, do that today, iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. So looking at Pace, 6'5", 285, and over his career with the Chippewas, 54 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 2 pass breakups, a forced fumble, and a blocked field goal. Super productive this last season for Central Michigan. His most productive year, 34 tackles, 4 sacks, plus all those additional statistics, PBUs, forced fumble, blocked field goal, and earned all MAC honorable mention. So, Adam, we'll start with you here. What'd you think about the addition? Of course, like I said, we've known about this one for about 10 days. So, what are your thoughts and what you've learned about Jonah Pace in reading about him and the addition to the Iowa roster?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a very productive addition to the roster basically from day one because he's exactly the sort of player that the defensive line needed to get. He brings that experience, he brings that versatility. You mentioned in your article that it wasn't immediately apparent that, he might be somebody that they could look at defensive end as well as defensive tackle. And ultimately, when you have somebody like that, that means you can trust them at the one technique. You can trust them at the three technique. You can trust them at the five technique. So he's going to fill a lot of that like Logan Lee sort of responsibility for this defensive line. And when you're able to do that, that makes you, they talk about those every down backs. Jonah Pace looks like an every down defensive lineman. So, you can trust him in those goal line situations. You can trust him, without having to go four defensive ends, on your third and longs. You can trust him to still pack up that middle and make sure that, that offensive line doesn't get to the second level on something. So, that is the level of trust and stability that you get from an experienced transfer portal guy like Jonah Pace. So I think this is, especially in terms of what Iowa was going for, it's really obvious why they zeroed in on him so quickly and why they've got to be ecstatic to finally get this on the board. Ross, what do you think about Pace here?
Yeah, I agree with what you said, and I really like that Logan Lee comparison. I think that's a good way to look at him and what he can bring to this unit, this defensive tackle unit, especially. He really seems like a plug and play guy and a guy that can really slot in, next to Graves at D tackle. And think about him more like Lee and what he did at that position versus, I guess technically he's kind of replacing Y.A. Black, but I don't think he's going to be the same type of player as Black, which is okay. Like Iowa has succeeded with different types of guys at those D tackle positions. And Pace, like you said, looks more like a Logan Lee type, but super productive, good against a run, good pass rusher, guy that can play, out at end if need be. But when Iowa brings in those pass rush heavy, third down lines, he's a guy that can probably stay on the field. You're not necessarily subbing him off.
And if we're talking about, if we want to throw out another comp, especially one that's going to make the line honks among the Hawkeye fans happy here, Ross, one of our favorite defensive tackle combos in recent memory, Cruel and Unusual Punishment, Matt Cruel and Mitch King. This very much looks like a Matt Cruel comp for Logan Pace as well. And when you're that type of defensive tackle that you can put over basically any of the five different linemen. You can head up, you can play gap with them. What that also accomplishes is keeping your linebackers clean, upright, and that's exactly how Iowa plays. Their defensive line and their defense in general. And that's one of the things that Cruel was so great at, was just clogging up the space, letting King be that disruptive force on that other side of the line, and then also making sure that Iowa's linebackers were cleaning up basically everything behind him. Those were some pretty great defenses. If Iowa can replicate that to whatever, and with Pace in the middle, again, they're doing cartwheels over something like that.
Right. So I think the way he will complement Aaron Graves will be really positive and productive at that D tackle spot. He's a guy that came in as a defensive end and then transitioned to playing defensive tackle for the Chippewas, and that's where things started to come together for him, is when he started playing DT. Talking to him just a little bit ago, he mentioned that it wasn't necessarily one thing that changed for him his senior year, but like the final conglomeration of all the things he was doing right resulted in a productive final season for him at Central Michigan. And I think being tall, being a guy that's played defensive end before, I think that three tech spot is going to be really productive, really solid for him. I mean, traditionally, that three tech defensive tackle position is kind of like having another defensive end on the field. So a guy that's kind of a little bit of both will be really positive for Iowa, I think. I think it keeps Jeremiah Pittman more than likely in that second group of defensive tackles, which I think is ultimately a good thing. I mean, he's good. He's good enough to play, right? But he's not up to Aaron Graves, right? And what we've heard continually is Y.A. Black and Aaron Graves are NFL defensive tackles, and they are. And we'll soon find out if Jonah Pace is that as well. And I think 1 year under Kelvin Bell, under Jay Neiman, will be really good for Jonah as well. I personally think Iowa continues to look to add maybe probably just one defensive lineman just to shore things up in there. Maybe a guy with a little bit more eligibility that can come in and contribute, but also grow and become more of a pivotal piece to the defensive line in the following season. That's why Langdon Kitchen would have been a really nice add, a guy who still had his red shirt, but will also have 2 years. So I think they'd benefit from adding another defensive lineman. Of course, Brian Allen out for the spring sucks. That's not good for the defensive end group, but getting Ethan Hurkett back and definitely Aaron Graves back is big. So we shall see how that all turns out. Again, stay tuned for that article. I'm gonna be having that up probably in the morning, tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning for Christmas Eve. For everybody out there. So stay tuned for that.
One
Now,
last present under the tree,
yes,
defensive lineman. Ho ho
exactly.
ho.
Would you call that article a stocking stuffer, Elliot?
Oh,
Sure, Ross. I don't know.
You can boo me. It's fine.
I- So, on to the more disappointing news for the Iowa fan base over the last 24 hours. It is no Beau Pribula picks Missouri out of the transfer portal over the Hawkeyes, over Ole Miss, over UCF, and didn't even visit Indiana, but headed to Missouri reportedly for 7 figures. A guy that probably would have been a really solid fit for Iowa, but at the same time, no starting experience. You're not really sure what you'd be getting into in terms of the upside necessarily, but a guy that also probably would have been looked at as the immediate starter for the Hawkeyes coming in from Penn State. So a miss, if you will, and not exactly. I wouldn't call it ideal for Iowa to miss on this type of prospect, considering what's left in the portal. I know I tweeted that it's back to the drawing board and you shouldn't be that concerned. I did a little bit of a look, and quarterback starting to wear thin a little bit in the portal, and there will be more additions. There will be more transfers that enter, but the it's slim pickings right now. We'll say that for the Hawkeyes in the portal at quarterback. But anyway, Ross, I'll start with you on this one. Your thoughts when you saw Pribula picked the Tigers?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we kind of started with this, I don't know that there was ever a strong sense that he was going to end up in Iowa City. But, though, as it went on and you heard more about that Iowa was a real player and that, it was, one of the final schools he was looking at, I think you started to, I don't want to say get your hopes up, but at least start thinking this was a more realistic possibility. And, get excited about what he could bring to that quarterback room and to that offense, which I think is considerable. Like, you mentioned it before, like he's the guy that would come in and probably be a day one starter. And, he really has a pretty exciting set of skills at quarterback that haven't really seen from a Hawkeye quarterback for quite a while, honestly. So, yeah, the fact that they seem like they were maybe close, maybe not. We don't really know the details, but to actually getting that kind of talent at quarterback is disappointing. You're kind of back to what you got. You've got Sullivan, Sullivan the elder, and Sullivan the younger, the new one coming in, and you got Hank Brown from Auburn. So you got guys to work with, but no surefire things there. Not that I wouldn't exactly say Pribula was a surefire guy either, since he hasn't started like you said, but a lot of experience at a big time program, a lot of talent, a lot of things to like there. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where Iowa goes at quarterback in the portal. What are you thinking, Adam?
Well, I think for the most part, I agree with you guys that Beau Pribula would have been an upgrade at quarterback. But, again, we're getting back to the uh, almost got a spit take out of Ross. Almost got a spit take out of Ross.
I caught it.
Oh,
I caught it, and I was like, Adam, it's Pribula, right? Oh wait.
it was
uh,
like slow burn there, a slow drip out of the glass. Anyway, no, but Ross, you mentioned an important point that he wasn't an established starter, and for most of what we saw from him on the field, and a lot of this was just sort of role specific, game time sort of specific, but most of what we saw from him was running the ball, and the limited extent that we got to see Pribula as a passer, you know, he knows where the laces are, sure, but he doesn't look like that much of an upgrade from Brendan Sullivan. And, ultimately, if we're looking at a guy who looks like Sully plus, then I'm not dead sold on that as being how you really unlock this offense, because it seems to me that you want as much as anything, especially with how we sort of saw how they wanted the offense to work with Cade McNamara. A lot of this is timing. A lot of this is as granular as you take these three steps, you make this one read, and then if the wide receiver, runs his footwork as well as you did yours, he's going to be open right here, right? Like that level of sort of precision to it. And we never really saw Pribula be that kind of QB at Penn State. Again, like a lot of times he's coming in when it's 34-3 and there's 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Like there's a lot of times where it just wouldn't have been sporting. But I think a guy like Devin Brown, for example, has been able to showcase that level of talent more consistently. And honestly, like I like his arm. I think he's got a better a better sense of timing, especially when you're throwing to plus level receivers like he was doing. Like he was in there in garbage time and throwing to Carnell Tate last year, right? Like that's a level of insanity that he's not really going to experience at Iowa per se. But the way that he's able to run that offense, find guys in stride, that looked more like a functioning what Tim Lester has in mind sort of offense than what we saw from Pubula. So, obviously if Iowa was that interested in him and to, land in the final two, he represented something very substantial as an upgrade to them, not trying to, this isn't some sort of sour grapes thing. I just don't think, and have never really thought that Pribula was the top name available. Not only in terms of like raw talent, but just in terms of what a potential fit in this Iowa offense would have been. Again, an upgrade, clearly, yes, but not an irreplaceable loss here to me. Elliot, would you agree with that?
Um, I don't know. You know,
Yeah.
I think it has to be played out yet to a certain degree, right? We have to see what he does at Missouri. We have to see what he's really capable of as a starter because we haven't seen him in anything more than this niche role of coming on the field and being a quarterback with some legs, but that can also throw it when things are designed for him. What I what my read of the situation is that the Hank Brown type that had a conversation with me, which again, that's available on iWithoutRivals.com after he committed, who said, I I haven't been guaranteed anything and that I am wanting to come in and compete, and that's what I've been offered, and it's that simple. I think that's the type that Iowa is designed for. There are some options left in the portal like that. And I think that type of player is exactly what Iowa wants. I think there was some differences with the way the last quarterback was brought in. I think there are some differences, and I honestly think that not getting Pribula allows Iowa to maneuver in their more traditional ways. So that is how I will put that. I think that there are options out there. I think this is not the end of the world come the portal. I think Sullivan and Brown will be fun to watch the competition. Who knows how Jimmy Sullivan will grow over the next year. I don't think that he's going to be starting in 2025, but who's to say that things don't go in a positive direction for him? Do I think they need another quarterback? I do. I do. I think you probably want to get another guy with a year, 2 years of eligibility left that you believe or that you believe could compete with Sully for the starting position. Because going into spring, it's Sully's job to lose, right? Like, who knows what Hank Brown's going to do when he comes in? He's started games before, but I think adding a third quarterback to that shuffle that you believe can compete with Sully, whether it's any of the guys that I listed in that article or somebody else that hasn't even entered the portal, and maybe it's somebody that enters the portal that you think is a clear option, a better, a clear better option than Sully. Um, I don't know, but there's only 5 days left that the portal is going to be open for players to enter, other than those who, their coach gets fired or what is it? Is it an added 5 day window after your bowl game is over? Isn't that how that isn't that an ad? I thought I saw that somewhere, but that might be BS.
It'd be
I
nice. I
I'm
honestly,
not
this is all
sure.
so new in the landscape. I don't know if that's the answer. I know it's a 30-day window if your coach leaves.
Right.
And that might also extend to position coaches too, although I can't
Oh, I don't know about
guarantee.
that.
That might be just for NILs, but yeah, certainly a 30-day window for transferring after a coach.
Sure.
But yeah, in terms of a bowl game situation, that'd be nice. I hope so. You know, so you don't get those situations like Pribula found himself in. But we'll see.
So exactly, and that's pretty much where we're at right now. And I don't know if you guys have anything else to add to that quarterback specific conversation, but if not, or you do, Adam?
Well, one little thing, you were talking a little bit cryptically at the beginning in terms of, how Iowa was bringing in quarterbacks and this and that. For everyone who is not able to read between the lines and is not a subscriber to Hawkeye Beacon, it's iowa.rivals.com //subscribe. You can read our press box premium board, everything that Eliot was alluding to. Uh, he spells out, and it's a very valid point, and I think certainly something. I again, we'll just keep this one for others to read between the lines on the podcast, but you don't get the sense that Kirk Ferentz was terribly upset by this decision.
And I don't, from everything that I have seen from Kirk, but also heard from behind the scenes, is he and the program are very much, I don't want to say unflappable because I think that's a little hyperbolic, but very much this is the way it is. We're gonna make it work with what we've got. Or okay, Pribula's off the table. What's next? So, and I don't mean that to be, fluffy or a promotion of the program, but it's true.
Yeah.
I think that's the way KF has operated for a long time, and that I don't necessarily see that changing now. I would expect Tyler Barnes to continue to follow some players that are in the portal that maybe he hasn't followed yet on Twitter, and for the names of Iowa the names I was interested in. I expect that to continue to grow. And reminder that that cutoff, the 28th, is only for players to enter. They can still be recruited. They can still go on visits afterwards if they're still in the portal. So, still plenty of names in the portal. Whether or not they're good ones is up for debate. Ross, you got something?
Yeah, yeah. As far as the 5 day extra window, so for teams that are in the playoff and later bowl games, I didn't find a definition of what constitutes a later bowl game, but those teams do get an additional 5 day transfer portal window in January after the portal closes, the one that's open right now. So
Hmm. I would imagine that means those New Year's Day bowl games, right?
I would guess probably bowl games, yeah,
New Year's
certainly
Day
anything New
usually.
Year's Day or later. I don't
Yeah.
know if games on the 30th and 31st, who knows exactly, but
This is one of those things. I don't know if we've talked about this too extensively on the podcast. I've talked about it with other people, but this is one of those things where it's so clear that the NCAA needs to figure something out that's different than what's currently going on because this portal window and enrolling and also lining up with the class schedule and stuff like that is not advantageous toward anybody. Anybody. Like I in looking at the Pribula thing too, that sucks. Like for him to have to miss out on this playoff run by Penn State in order to find the best situation for him, because he probably wouldn't have ended up at Missouri if he had to wait, right? It probably would have been that Cal quarterback, or I think there's another quarterback out there, not Mateer, but another one that's available right now that the bigger programs are looking at, and this is just not ideal for anybody. Throw in the fact that these walk-ons are kind of getting screwed out of a roster spot in the midst of it all. It's just a mess. And we talked about this in the middle of the season. The NCAA has botched this in just about every way possible. This is just with NIL, with the portal, all of it. It's a mess. It's a mess. And I think we all, us three, chose to cover college sports because you get a little bit of anarchy and it makes it fun. But at the same time, this is almost reached beyond anarchy. And this isn't an NCAA criticism podcast, though it can get to that point at times. So let's revert back to what we were getting at here with Iowa, with the portal, where they're at, with two signees and Hank Brown and Jonah Pace. I think all of us are on the same page that adding these two players, once again, it's that same mantra that we've gone back to. It's raising the floor for this 2025 Iowa football team, and getting them now as opposed to after the spring is a positive. Though Soley and Jacob Gill came in after the spring, you get these guys prior to the spring, they get ingratiated with the team, they get more opportunities to learn the offense. All of these things are positive. So you prefer to get more transfers right now as opposed to after this or in the spring window. Iowa has swung and missed on a few. Sam Phillips is still a name that's being floated out there. Visited this weekend, receiver from Chattanooga. Hoping to talk with him soon. Virginia Tech is involved there. I can't remember the other school, but there were three schools involved in his recruitment. And then other than that, we had heard about a Trayvon Rudolph visit, and there may be some other ones just in the works. Again, this is something every single school, but Iowa for us is the more prominent one, obviously. Every single school is keeping their portal information tight to the vest. So we're able to get bits and pieces here and sharing all of it on the premium board, but it's a difficult situation to really get a read on. But beside the point, are you guys I don't know if nervous is the right word, but maybe questioning where Iowa's at in terms of their production via addition from the portal? Because you look at these schools that are also in the Big Ten, like Wisconsin, and I mean, Minnesota went out and got a quarterback. I think they've added a few other guys. Of course, Ohio State's a different story, but you look at some of these programs in the Midwest and Missouri for another one, speaking of which that have just added transfer. I mean, Missouri beat Iowa for two of their key targets in Langdon Kitchen, who visited Iowa twice, and Beau Pribula, who Iowa wanted clearly. Now, I feel like I'm caught. I regarding patience, I had a lot more patience that first week. And now that there hasn't been any real solid traction with some of these guys, I'm starting to feel like some of the fan accounts out there on Twitter that are pissed that it's only been two. I'm starting to understand it, and I'm starting to also be like, okay, but you gotta add more. One quarterback and one DT out of the portal in this class, not gonna cut it. Not gonna cut it. Adam, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that especially with the amount of rebuilding that they're going to have to do on defense, I don't think it would be necessarily fair to guys like um, Carson Shire to go out and reload at linebacker with a bunch of grad transfers, for as much as those guys have been waiting their turn. But you do have to really take stock of what you've got on both sides of the line, or excuse me, on both sides of the ball, and say there are some key pieces that really need to be addressed. Cornerback, still, clearly. Offensive line, they are losing a lot of production, a lot of experience, and a lot of, just trustworthy bodies. And, we talk about, or Elliot, you just mentioned raising the floor. So much of what college football is now, especially with everybody able to move and able to find rotation spots if they think that they're ready. It's such a commodity now to have a deep rotation of guys that you can trust. And every name that you can add from the portal who can be one of those trustworthy year one guys, it's not even a luxury. It's just a plain asset at this point. And so that's one why Kitchen made so much sense and why it hurts to miss a guy like that. But also, Hank Brown, how many times did we see Iowa over the last couple of years really, really need to have a stable of more than two quarterbacks, right? And so adding these guys who can help, who raise the floor, who can be those fresh legs off the bench, even if they're not starter material, you get as many of those dudes as possible and you hang on for dear life essentially is sort of the name of the game now until the NCAA finally brings some stability for it. So it's going to be fascinating to see how Iowa is able to find those valuable I guess commodities in you really like to talk about people as commodities, but it's going to be fascinating to see how available guys like that are, how much they want to come to Iowa just to compete. When in this day and age, there might be someone saying, from the SEC saying, "Hey, we know you're good. We know you can start. Here's $1 million." How do you turn that down, right? And so it's a brand new world, and how Iowa sticks to its guns in terms of program philosophy, and how much that means you really do or don't want to play ball with some of these guys. You know, Kirk has swum with the stream really well over these last few years, but boy, if you don't want to get involved with the high dollar business of and the sort of cutthroat aspect of the portal, I sort of remember when Todd Licklider said that he didn't want to do AAU recruiting at Iowa. And how well did that work out? Like at some point, you got to say, all right, this is how playing ball works now. And you're either up or out for something like that. So I am going to be fascinated how this ends up shaking out for Iowa.
I gotta interject here, Ross, before you go and say that if Iowa fans knew there was going to be a Todd Licklider reference here in talking about the portal, nobody would listen.
Yeah, I'm going to have about 15 Amazon boxes of dog poop on my porch by tomorrow morning. Merry Christmas from Iowa fans. Sorry, Ross.
No, no, don't be. Well, I mean, do because you referenced Todd Licklider, but other than that, don't be sorry. Um, in terms of what Elliot was suggesting about the portal and the concern, it has kind of felt like, it's Christmas and you're watching other kids open presents all the time. Like other teams are getting lots of guys out of the portal. Iowa just doubled its portal acquisitions, an hour ago or 2 hours ago with getting Jonah Pace, went from one to two. And we talked about it a few weeks ago. When we said, kind of previewing the portal and what Iowa needs to do, and it's like, well, they need to get this and this and this and this and this, and it's like, well, okay, so far they've got two. So like there's some more work that needs to be done there. In terms of Iowa though, this also kind of doesn't surprise me a ton. Like they're very deliberate, in the portal, in recruiting, in player acquisition, kind of as a general practice. Like that's kind of definitely been the MO under Ferentz for pretty much his entire time here, is extremely deliberate, extremely careful, very concerned about, program fit and all of that. And the other thing is, he always he mentions often, he mentioned it at the press thing last Friday, player development. And it does feel like Iowa is continuing to bank pretty heavily on retaining guys and continuing to develop them. So, we've seen a lot of guys go in the portal, yes, but it's been a lot of those guys who are, they're all important players, but these are guys who are former walk-ons, who are caught in that 105 man roster crunch, special teams guys, etc. There's a lot of guys that I think are still there. The guys, like the linebackers that have been waiting their turn, like Adam referenced. Those guys haven't left. They're not in the portal. They've been waiting their turn. And, I think now is when Iowa and Ferentz and Phil Parker and Seth Wallace are going to see exactly what they have there. It's a different model for sure, though. I mean, it's relying on your ability to mold those guys and develop them out of sight and to turn them into, good football players, and not just, grab a ready-made player off the shelf, which is what you're doing out of the portal, essentially. Is it going to work? I don't know. But the longer Iowa goes without making significant moves in the portal, kind of feels like we're going to get a referendum on that next fall, because we're going to have a lot of guys that are those developmental guys that have just ascended into starting roles and key contributor roles, or big playing time roles, at least next year, because there's nobody else. There's somebody's got to be there, and they're not getting a ton of guys out of the portal to fill those roles.
And I'll just play this tape forward for you a little bit, Ross. And when next season ends and Iowa's got 8 or 9 wins, both the Ferentz side and the transfer heavy crazed side will be saying, told you so," right? Like,
We'll get a from Kirk. We'll get a few. We'll get a few of those.
The Kirk
Uh,
snow.
so I guess what my question to you guys would be is, do you think Kirk is this is I almost said risk averse. It's like, yeah. You ever you ever seen how much that guy punts? Um, Risk
Breaking news.
averse here portal wise because they've added via the portal before, right? And they've added talent that has contributed and contributed at a high level. I don't necessarily think it's due to Kirk being risk averse here. I think they've just missed. I think it's that simple. I mean, like sometimes that just happens. I mean, you try to recruit a receiver and that's gonna be hard unless you're dipping in the FCS or G5 and you're their only option, right? That's power four. Or I mean, it's gonna be difficult to land a guy like a Beau Pribula, given the circumstances of the offense and everything regarding the history. And sometimes school guys just like other schools, you know? And I think those three factors have left Iowa in a tough spot right now. I think they're trying. I think they're actively working. It's just been a couple whiffs, and sometimes that just happens. I do think I don't think it's entirely that simple, but that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it is also December 23rd. And, it's not March, it's not April. It's certainly not July or August, right? Like there's so much that still has yet to play out, right?
Yep.
The transfer window is still open. And as we've mentioned before, it's going to open again. And so there will be and as has been mentioned before as well, they don't stop recruiting these guys just because the portal window closes, right? Like this is sort of an ongoing process and we're early on in said process. So, some of it's just pumping the brakes and saying, hey, this is early. And especially for a program that is as deliberate in how they approach things, you know, you get why uh, people, Russ, the analogy of everybody else opening presents is absolutely perfect. But Kirk has sort of turned his nose up at this sort of like shiny new thing situation before. He did that with Wisconsin and bringing in the air raid, and everyone's like, well, why aren't you spreading and shredding? And look, they already fired Phil Longo. And Luke Fickell's seat is a whole lot hotter than Kirk's right now, right? So you understand why that reluctance to act rashly exists, right? Like you understand why that deliberation, it's not just there to like piss off fans, it
Are you
only
sure?
about 5%, only about 5% of spite, only about, but here is one more example, right? Everyone was sort of grumpy about Tim Lester coming in as offensive coordinator, and one of the big names that they were grumpy that he wasn't was Kevin Johns. Kevin Johns has already left Oklahoma. And, that is pretty much precisely what Kirk Ferentz did not want to have happen. And a big part of that would be, he didn't want to be in a situation where he's got three offensive coordinators in 3 years. Like that sounds horrible to try to pull off in Iowa City, right? So you understand where that deliberation comes from, if nothing else. So he comes by it honestly, as they say.
The thing that you mentioned there, Adam, I don't know if you mentioned the numbers, and I don't think I mentioned this on the podcast just before we started recording, was that Wisconsin has added, I believe, 15 transfers in this portal window, but they lost 25 players.
Yeah.
I believe maybe an Iowa fan can be upset with the lack of ferocity that Iowa has gone at the portal, comparatively to some of these programs. At least that's the perception, right?
The urgency, certainly, yes.
Urgency, sure. Urgency is probably the better word. But when you're Wisconsin and you lose 25 players, sure, Iowa's lost a good contingent of these walk-ons, but that's their decision. That's something they were forced to do. When you lose 25 players, that level of urgency in the portal is definitely higher than where it's at for Iowa. So it's all relative, right? You have to, the context is important. It's something that I say frequently because it is. Context is important, especially when we're talking about this subject and how Iowa is handling things. Um, I don't necessarily have anything else to say on the topic. You guys good? I'm ready to get out of here and tell everybody to have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Alrighty. Well, we will wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of Podcast. Before you get out of here, make sure you hit that subscribe button there on YouTube. Drop a like, drop a comment. Who do you think Iowa should go after in the portal? Maybe they haven't landed. How are you feeling about their class currently? Let us know down there in the comments. If you're not a premium subscriber yet, here with us, do that today. iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. We're going to keep you apprised on all things portal, recruiting, men's and women's basketball, all the things going on right now. Going to have some bowl prep intel I'm going to drop tomorrow morning as well. So stay tuned for that. And again, if you're on Apple Podcast, Spotify, leave that written review, hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And for now, I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Adam Jacoby and Ross Binder, and we will see you next time.